Good morning, everyone. So my name is Colin Scholtz, and this is Risk Management Professionals webinar series. The key speaker today will be George Manuhu of RMP. And for some logistical information, our producer is Alex Metulev. He'll be in the background keeping us operational and fully functional. Now, what you should see on your screen is a video image of the speaker, me, and a PowerPoint presentation. So the audio and the presentation are currently being recorded, and they should be available for reviewing within a week or so. Now this morning we're using a GoToWebinar meeting interface to support our presentation. Should you experience any technical difficulties, you can contact us at 877-532-0806, and we should have technical staff available to help with any troubleshooting that you have. Now on your screen you should have a small box that has both an image of the speaker and then a separate box that has the presentation. Now the sizes of these boxes are adjustable, so you can click on the interface between the two boxes and adjust them to fit what looks best on your viewing device. In the left-hand corner, there's a box that says Webcam. You can use it as a pull-down menu and adjust the position of the speaker to your liking, so you can move that around. Now we also have a dialog box for questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them in the question box, and at the end of the presentation, we will include them in our Q&A session. Also, if there are minor technical issues, you can also query the producer, Alex, and he can get back to you with any issues as well. Now, this webinar is a part of RMP's ongoing outreach program, and our core competencies and expertise reside in EPA risk management plans, OSHA PF process safety management programs, CalARP, and SEMS and other related safety management systems. We also specialize in HAZOP and LOPA facilitation and related hazard identification studies, and also a variety of other process safety and regulatory standards and regulations. Now, RMP is able to assist its many clients who prefer to use a consultant with expertise and competencies in these areas. Our main objective with these webinar series is just to provide outreach so that the viewers of the presentation have a little bit better understanding on the regulations and the best practices for implementing these standards so that everyone can have a safe environment. So, as our title slide says, this morning we'll be talking about the IIAR Bulletin 109 Overview and tips. So this is specific to ammonia refrigeration. And as I mentioned, our key speaker will be George Manuhu. So you should see an overview of what we'll be discussing this morning. First, George is going to give a little bit of background as to why we are here, and then he'll go over some of the regulatory overview, including how this connects to the CalARP, RMP, PSM programs, and the extension into IIAR. And then from there, he'll go into the meat of the discussion, which is on the Bulletin 109 tips and best practices and common deficiencies. From there, we'll recap and have an interactive Q&A session that everyone can participate in. And also, I understand that there are some regulators listening to this, so if they have any insights to offer at the end during the Q&A session, we would all appreciate that. This is just a quick slide for a summary of services for what we at RMP do, and you can just review it for background information. And without further ado, let's dive right in and bring on George.
Thank you very much, Colin. So, why is safety so critical? You know, sometimes people ask, why does our company need to have a real strong safety culture? Well, we only store meat, food, or dairy is one of the often responses. And how bad can it really be? Now, when you look at the history of ammonia refrigeration systems, we see that an ammonia refrigeration system can potentially be hazardous. So here are just two examples of what could happen if safety is not a priority. Okay, some recent incidents. In August 2013, an ammonia leak at a Shanghai cold storage facility resulted in the deaths of 15 individuals and 26 injuries. Now, in September 11th, 2013, less than a month later, an ammonia leak at a U.S. wine producer also resulted in one additional death. Now, when we think of safety, we should recognize that it's not an event, but it's actually an ongoing process and should be a part of your living part of your operations. Remember, safety is no accident. Now, let's go through a quick regulatory overview. Let me introduce the main regulatory programs that establish a minimum criteria for safe operation of hazardous chemical process in the United States. The three programs that we're concerned with are the California Accidental Release Prevention Program, or CalARP, the EPA's Risk Management Program, or RMP, and OSHA's Process Safety Management Program. If your facility possesses hazardous substances above the respective thresholds, you may be required to submit either a risk management program or a process safety management program. If you're uncertain where you fit in, feel free to give us a call and we'd be more than happy to help. So you might ask, what is the purpose of these regulatory programs? So first, it's to document that personnel are safely operating and maintaining a process that utilizes a highly hazardous material, and also to ensure that management is dedicating the minimum resources needed to prevent an accidental release. Namely, these things are training, equipment, maintenance, and the appropriate personnel in the appropriate places. So what exactly does the regulation say? Inspections and tests must be performed on all process equipment. Testing procedures and frequency of inspections must follow generally accepted good engineering practices. All testing should be documented, and you're going to hear this as a recurring theme throughout the presentation. So remember, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen, right? And finally, all equipment deficiencies must be remedied. So this brings us to, who is the IIAR, or the International Institute of Ammonia Refrigeration? The IIAR is an organization that serves the industrial refrigeration industry. They do this through the establishment and promotion of standards and best practices that represent a minimum criteria for safety. What are the IIAR Bulletins? Well, the IIAR issues bulletins as informative documents. These are written as best practice guidelines where no other standard or guideline exists. So this includes our topic for today. It's the B109 safety criteria, minimum safety criteria for safe ammonia refrigeration systems. So let's go into B109 safety inspections. So a quick overview, B109 provides guidance, as we said, on the minimum safety criteria for the ammonia refrigeration systems. These criteria are intended to be applied during annual, 5-year safety inspections and audits, and these are collectively referred to as the B109 audits. So annual inspections, they're primarily done by refrigeration staff. And we've seen that one good practice is to have new personnel participate in these annual inspections as part of on-the-job training. And here we get to instill a sense of awareness of safe operating requirements. Every 5th year, inspection of the system should be done by someone knowledgeable of refrigeration and good engineering practices. Now, non-destructive testing, there is no set frequency for this type of testing. But it's something that often comes up from observations or from assessments that are made during either of these two other inspections. So one thing that I want to point out before we get into the inspections is that these inspections are not the same as preventive maintenance. What we're trying to do is ensure that refrigeration equipment is operated in a safe manner and the maintenance is done in accordance with manufacturers' guidelines and industry's best practices. Now, annual visual inspections are a separate maintenance activity. The purpose of this activity is to take a thorough look at each component to see if there's anything that needs to be addressed that wasn't covered during preventive maintenance. Inspections should be conducted annually as part of a facility's preventive maintenance. Each facility should have an appointed representative responsible for compliance with all refrigeration safety requirements. Smaller facilities could pick a week and just get all these requirements done at the same time, where larger facilities should schedule inspections to occur on an ongoing basis. Now, all equipment and safety systems should be inspected separate from the regularly scheduled preventive maintenance at least once per calendar year. Now, for the 5th year inspections, a more thorough inspection of an ammonia refrigeration system should be conducted by a competent ammonia refrigeration system engineer or other authority every 5 years. The facility could assign someone familiar with the process to work with the inspector to ensure that nothing's missed. The facility could also require the review of inspection findings and recommendations to ensure accuracy, or require the inspector to deliver the report at a formal meeting. This provides valuable insight and a learning experience and helps align facility personnel on safety issues. So non-destructive testing isn't completely included in the B109 checklist, but it is included here as a follow-up to the visual inspection concerns. And it should be a part of your preventive maintenance. Try to avoid any type of inspection that puts a hole in your insulation. Observation of equipment should include visual and auditory clues. Count vibration analysis, oil analysis, and ammonia quality testing as part of your ongoing non-destructive testing. So the B109 safety inspections, they establish guidelines and checklists for the following components. Compressors, evaporative condensers, heat exchangers, pressure vessels, air cooling evaporators, refrigerant pumps, piping systems, ventilation systems, pressure relief devices, and general system safety requirements. So let's go into some safety inspection tips. So one thing that's really important when you start to get into the process of doing the B109 inspections is managing your time. Making the process as painless as possible increases the likelihood of a thorough inspection and a repeat of the process as part of an active part of your process management. To that end, it's critical that the inspection be conducted in a manner that optimizes the time spent doing the inspection. And when we look at the checklist, we see that there's 2 parts. The first page is the general equipment information. The second page is what the actual inspection checklist contains. Now, page 1 should be part of your process safety information documentation. And it should be filled out when the equipment is originally installed. So to save time, do this once and have it filed away. Now, when you take a look at the checklist, on the left-hand side is some of the basic information. It gives information on the company, design capacity, minimum and maximum suction, etc. These things shouldn't change without an MOC. So you can fill this out. On the right-hand side is the meat of the inspection, and this is what should be completed for each unit on an annual basis. Now, how many inspections? Sometimes one component will require multiple B109 inspections. This needs to be kept in mind when developing your annual inspection program. An example of this are the compressor skids. Now, in the compressor skids, you have several different components, including the compressor, pressure vessels, and the heat exchanger. And if you keep these things in mind, you can handle all these issues at the same time. Other examples would be the pressure relief valves on pressure vessels. That would be contained in 2 other inspections as well. So to save time and effort, all relevant inspections should be done at once, right? Now, some things to keep in mind when doing your annual inspections. Ammonia is not corrosive, so typically any corrosion will be on the outside of the system. Now, damage mechanisms typically include failed insulation and vapor barriers, rust, microbial growth, and also thermal cycling. Corrosion and wall thickness are also a major concern because ammonia pressure can cause a rupture and a release into the community. So let's take a minute to talk about water. Water contamination within the ammonia refrigeration system is a bad thing and actually causes many operational issues as well as safety issues. What we see when we get water in our systems, we see changes in pump operation, changes in piping and pressure drop, reduction in evaporator performance, lower compressor capacity and increased power consumption, and chemical changes in compressor oil and corrosion of process equipment and piping. Many of these should clue you into the fact that you have water in your system. So as you're doing your process management, you should be looking for these types of signs. Because of this, ammonia quality analysis is an important part of your non-destructive testing program. So anhydrous ammonia is meant to have very little water in it, and is actually supposed to have a purity of 99.995%. Ammonia has a high affinity for water, so when water finds its way in your system, it will wreak havoc on it. One place ammonia samples should be pulled from are the recirculators in your system. Once you have this water in your system, be aware it never leaves. It's just going to gather in cold points within the system due to its lower vapor pressure relative to ammonia. So oil analysis, what exactly can it tell you and why is it important? So before we get to that, are you doing it, right? And if you are doing it, where are you pulling your samples from? Just pulling samples from the compressor, it's not adequate. Samples should be pulled from all oil draining points, especially from the coldest parts of your system. Both the oil analysis and the ammonia analysis should be part of that non-destructive testing program. So what exactly will these samples tell us? Okay, the oil that has made it from the compressor to an oil draining point passed through the entire system. On its journey, it's probably done a few things. It's coated the inside of the piping, thus further protecting it from corrosion, and it's also picked up any debris that it may have come in contact with. In these samples, we can find a lot of information about how our system's working. We can look for rust, water, and metal flakes, and that tells us what types of issues we may encounter. So let's consider ice for a moment. Ice poses several unique hazards to the ammonia refrigeration system. Excessive ice can result in excessive weight on your system and damage it. Ice where it's not expected in general, it's a bad thing. Especially ice that goes through freeze and thaw cycles. These should be dealt with first. These freeze-thaw cycles are points where corrosion would occur and is actually expected to occur. So let's review a few things about corrosion. Tears or breaks in the vapor barrier. These are highly probable places where corrosion may occur. Places where you see microbial growth. Any rusting or pitting is definitely a sign of corrosion. Discoloration of the insulation. This would be due to moisture or condensation is a likely candidate. And also finding any foreign substances in your oil like water, rust, or metal flakes is also a sign that you're probably going to have corrosion issues as well. So let's talk a little bit about the different inspection checklist and some deficiencies that you may see when going through and looking at these checklists. So let's talk a little bit about general safety first to start. There are a couple things that we should be aware of. First, when doing any sort of testing on systems, testing it should be done when it's not going to affect operations, right? Some of the things that they look for in general safety, some things where you may have deficiencies are making sure that main shutoff valves are properly identified and accessible. And keyword there being identified. Are main shutoff valves accessible from the outside of a machinery room? And this is, it seems like common sense, but it's definitely something to be aware of. Having the appropriate equipment and piping markers. These should be in place to describe the unit direction of flow, physical state, pressure, etc. And if you need to know a little bit more about what that entails, guidance on this is given in the IIAR Bulletin 114. So another couple things about the general safety inspection checklist. It also contains 3 questions that should be answered for every vessel. The following questions, A, B, and C, should be filled out, and this includes gauges and valves installed at every equipment, vessel, and control. Are gauges and other sensors in good working condition? All right. Now also, are all accumulators and intercoolers equipped with high-level float switches with sound, a high liquid level alarm? Also, do they shut down the compressor when high liquid level is detected? Now, a little bit about piping. So doing piping inspections are probably one of the most challenging things for a facility to do. The challenges typically are like how to be thorough, how do we break down areas to be inspected, and how to properly document inspections and document the deficiencies. When dealing with these issues, the facility has to come up with a solid plan. And some things to look for are corrosion issues, ensure that pipes are adequately braced to prevent unwanted movement. Also, look for corrosion where insulation has been removed, sometimes even to perform ultrasonic testing. When it comes to vessels, corrosion is very common and very similar in piping as it is in vessels, right? Some other things to be looking for are safety relief valves for vessels should be set to relieve below the vessel's maximum allowable pressure. Switches and indicators should be in a usable condition so that required components can be seen. And inspections should be about looking at the equipment, but also about verifying that all the PSM documentation is up to date for these units. So for condensers, so when we consider condensers, we see that dirt and algae buildup are potential sources of corrosion issues. Here we want to ensure that there's adequate support and bracing of the system components. Also that there's appropriate information available to support the design parameters of the equipment. For evaporators, the typical issues for evaporators, like the other components, were corrosion issues. Also, loose or missing nuts for fan guards or missing fan guards, or loose or missing nuts for supporting structures. Compressors should be safe from water corrosion, but having the appropriate suction and oil pressure gauges is something that we've seen that could be an issue. Another thing that you may want to consider is listening to them and being aware of how they typically operate and how they sound. And this is one thing where just being attentive can really help with avoid any serious issues. Now, for heat exchangers, you want to verify that the system's operating within its limits. Ensure the safety relief valves are properly set, and be aware of ice around your system, especially ice where you're not used to having seen it before. Because as that water freezes, the expansion can cause damage to your system. So let's talk a little bit about ventilation. When we look at ventilation, we want to ensure that the fans are sufficient to adequately ventilate a room in case of an emergency situation. Just having fans may not be enough. Knowing how much that it would clear is a pretty important thing. Also, install a sign on each compressor room, warning of a possible, warning an entrant that the room contains ammonia. And also ensure that emergency ventilation is controlled by an ammonia detector, or means are achieved to confirm that emergency ventilation runs as required. Now, the relief valve sheet is a double check for all safety relief valve questions on the previous inspection sheets. Some of the questions that you're going to see is the right component operating below the components of maximal allowable working pressure, proper discharge flow rate. These are things that you can verify with calculations. Also, is the manufacturer's seal wire still attached to the relief valve? Is there a tag in place, or is there another means of ensuring that the replacement date is known? If these things are missing, the relief valve is essentially considered out of service. Are all of the safety relief valves less than 5 years old? Also, is the safety relief valve piped to a safely discharged 15 feet from the nearest standing area or 20 feet from any makeup air source? So for the pumps, we want to ensure that the pump is anchored securely in place. And we want to make sure that there aren't any excessive vibrations for the system. Excessive vibrations will cause damage to your system and reduce service life. Ensure that the pump suction and discharge gauges also function properly. Now, let's talk about deficiencies in general. First of all, we don't want to deflect or neglect these deficiencies. So when you do an inspection and you find things that need to be fixed, these are items that you need to resolve in a timely manner. This is often less than a year. Document deficiencies on the log sheet, and you need to document the steps that you go through to achieve resolution and the timeline. Remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So this is a key part of your process. All right, and also identified and unresolved deficiencies can set you up for possible regulatory fines. So these are not things that you want to leave hanging out there. So quick recap. As we said before, safety is not an event, but it's an ongoing process. And it should be a living part of your operations. Be aware of the signs of corrosion. Remember, the paperwork is part of the process. And your 5-year inspections should be done by someone you trust. After they're done, remember, review your findings. Make sure that they accurately represent your facility. And make sure there's something you can live with. Because sometimes you get recommendations that don't actually represent how your facility operates. So let's open it up to a little question and answer session.
Thank you, George. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. George, good job. Just a couple issues that I want to add at the very end. George was talking about recommendations and how you should pick a contractor that you trust. In experience, we've seen quite a wide range of the number of recommendations come out of B109s. If you have a couple facilities that are in a similar state and you send 2 different inspectors to each one facility might end up with 5 recommendations and another facility might end up with 850 recommendations. So there's a pretty wide variety there, which is why we recommend you go with someone you trust. And then also, most of you probably are aware of this, but when we do talk about corrosion, we're talking about typically external corrosion due to water, moisture, or internal corrosion due to any water that gets into the system. And just a quick, I think most people have gotten this, but ammonia will react with copper, brass, or similar metals in your system. So if you haven't already, do a quick check on that to make sure that you haven't. Because when we mentioned ammonia is not corrosive to the materials, we're typical materials that will react with brass and copper and zinc. So let's open up to questions, and Also, a quick plug, we would like to thank Precision for their help in putting this together. They're an affiliate that we've done work with before on these. So what do we have?
So we have a few comments. One, as a regulator, I love it when I see IIAR Bulletin 109s that have oil stains on them, are crinkled up and have writing all over them. This shows to me that they are taken out into the field where the inspections are performed.
Do you want to mention that? Summarize?
What's that?
Summarize that comment? Yeah, recap it.
Go ahead.
Sure. So we had a regulator make a comment. The regulator said they love it when they are doing an inspection and they review a facility's B109 inspection sheets, and they love to see it when they're oil stained and crinkled up because it actually means someone's walking out the system and writing on it out there in the process instead of doing a quick walkthrough and then walking back to an office and finishing it up.
Here's a question. When is an MOC required?
So the question is, when is an MOC required? Now, so anytime you have a change to your system that is not considered like kind, an MOC is going to be required to ensure that it's still going to be operating within safe parameters. Do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to build on that, anything that changes, any changes that affect your PSM documentation are would trigger an MOC, and it could be minor things from changing capacity on a relief valve, or I guess that's relatively major, but any not in-kind changes that affect your PSM documentation should trigger an MOC.
Here's a relevant question to that. Would temporary removal of insulation for inspection require an MOC?
So the question was, would temporary removal of insulation in order to perform wall thickness testing require an MOC? Is that correct? Yeah.
Just as temporary removal of insulation for inspection.
Yeah, or for inspection, it doesn't have to be wall thickness, could be any inspection. I would say that that's it could be a temporary MOC. The purpose of the MOC program is that to ensure that before you make any major changes to the system, you stop and think about the changes that you're making and if you're introducing any additional hazards. So the purpose of the program is, again, to prevent those hazards from occurring, and so this could be accomplished through, for this particular example, this could be accomplished through a procedure. If the company has a very thorough insulation removal procedure in order to accomplish this for their testing, then I would say an MOC is not required. But if they don't have any such procedure, then I would say that they should probably investigate some type of management system in order to ensure that you're not introducing any additional hazards when you remove that insulation and affect the vapor barrier. And if there are any regulators that have additional comments on that, feel free to send it to Alex, our producer.
So here's a pretty long comment. When the first page of the IIAR B109 is not completed, it is a red flag to the regulators. We often get a typical response, quote unquote. We cannot access the nameplate or the equipment. It's so old that the information is not known. This is not an acceptable condition under PSM. If the employer does not know the listed items on the first page, we'll open up the PSI element of PSM for further review. The info on the first page is often compared to the SOPs to ensure that the operating parameters in the SOP agrees with the info listed on the first page of the B109s.
So to summarize what the comment was, one of the regulators had commented that when the first page of the B109 is not completed, it's a red flag for the regulators. Oftentimes facilities will mention that the information could not be found because nameplates were not available, painted over, or documentation wasn't available overall. And I believe that the regulator had stated that when this is seen, that one of the first things that they like to do is go ahead and take a look at all the PSI information for a facility. Did you want to add anything to that?
That is a good comment, and George did a good job summarizing it. And I think a lot of times when general maintenance is done on equipment, like the painter comes, painting over a nameplate happens more frequently than you would think. And that's an issue because if that nameplate can't be found, then you don't have any information on your system and you could potentially be exceeding design limits. Now, by regulation and by code, there are certain pieces of equipment that require nameplates, like pressure vessels, for example. And legally, if a vessel does not have a nameplate, it cannot be used for that service, and so that's a big red flag. And then also, as George was saying, regulators, if the first page of an inspection sheet, and again, the first page contains all that summary PSI information, if that page is blank and they look at a facility's PSI and find out that if it's blank on the inspection checklist, there's a very good chance that it's missing in the PSI. And if you don't have that information, then you're not in compliance with the process safety information part of the regulation.
One question here. Do API recommended practices come into play with OSHA during inspection?
The question was, do API recommended practices come into play with OSHA during inspections? And I got to tell you, off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I'll have to do some more research on that. Does anyone here know?
Any recommended practice is referenced by the regulator.
Sure.
And APIs are less applicable to refrigeration systems than others. And if they have some specific questions, maybe they can get back to you.
Okay, yeah. So Steve's here, and Steve Marr, and he mentioned that
I used to work here.
any recommended practice is referenceable by a regulator. For ammonia refrigeration systems, APIs typically don't apply as strongly since they're more for oil and gas and petroleum industries. So IIAR is typically the standard that refers to. But if there are specific API questions, go ahead and give us a call, and we'll shoot us an email, and we'll dig further.
All right, here's a question. PSM requires inspections and test frequencies consistent with the manufacturer's recommendations and industry best practices. Are there pieces of equipment that require more than B109?
Okay, so the question is, PSM requires inspections and test frequencies consistent with manufacturers' recommendations and industry's best practices. Are there pieces of equipment that require more than B109? And so there are the equipment that do require more inspections than what is required by the B109. One of these, the condensers, should be expected more than annually, even though this isn't entirely spelled out by the manufacturers, but this is something that's learned on a facility-by-facility basis. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Colin?
Yeah, just to add on to that, it's not necessarily required by the standard, but facilities should take lessons learned from their inspections and tests and modify their inspection frequencies as needed. So as George said, condensers typically see a little bit more wear and tear than other things, and so twice a year may be required, or not required, but suggested for some facilities based off their operating experience. And then also, where there are discrepancies between manufacturers' best practices and IIAR, you should always go with the more stringent of the two.
So here another attendee has commented regarding the API question earlier, and they said they can be applied. The employer lists the practice that they want to follow. I have never seen an ammonia system follow API. They are very rigorous and not specific to ammonia, but you can list that you want to follow them.
Okay. Do you want to summarize?
Yeah, go ahead and summarize.
So one of the attendees commented back on the API issue that since OSHA PSM does not spell out what codes and standards you must follow, they only reference recognizing good engineering practices, or RAGAGAP if you prefer to say it that way. So the employer is, or the owner-operator is bound to whatever they say that they're going to follow. So they could say that they follow API standards, and then if in an audit it comes up that they're not actually following it, but they say they are, then that's an issue. However, it's typically not recommended because, as we mentioned, API is more for the oil and gas and petroleum industries and tends to be a lot more stringent than IIAR.
Are you finding that regulators review the B109 audits as part of PSM regulatory inspections, and are there common B109 deficiencies worth sharing?
Yes, we are seeing that regulators are reviewing the B109s. Okay, sorry. The question was, are you finding that regulators review the B109 audits as part of the PSM regulatory inspections? And are there common B109 deficiencies worth sharing? And to answer the first question, yes, the regulators are reviewing the B109 audits and inspection checklists. So one of the things, one of the more common finds that you'll see or deficiencies is that when the inspection team notices a particular item is missing or deficient for multiple years, and nothing's done about this in any kind of reasonable time frame, this is just setting yourself up for a citation.
Yeah, just to build on that, whenever an inspector comes in or an auditor comes in, the easiest thing they're going to look at is closure of recommendations, be it from compliance audits, PHAs, incident investigations, or in this case, B109 audits. And it's very easy for someone to come in, ask for the report, look for a summary of the findings, and say, show me what you've done on these findings. And we've found that looking at, as George was saying, 2 or 3 years worth of B109 inspections, if the same deficiencies keep popping up but nothing's being done about them, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of doing the inspection in the first place, and the facilities setting themselves up for potential citations.
Okay, so an attendee has made a comment. As a regulator that does ammonia PSM inspections, I ask for the last 3 years of B109 audits for every inspection. I will take B109's completed inspections into the field with me when I look at equipment to see if the last inspection is agreeing with what I'm observing in the field. They are a critical piece of information during an inspection.
Okay, so we had a comment from one of our regulators, and they mentioned that as a regulator, they go out when they get to a facility, they will ask for 3 years worth of the B109 inspections, and take those inspections out with them into the field to make sure that the results and the closures that are generated from the B109 are actually acted upon. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, just make sure that the current status of the equipment matches up with what's being documented in the inspections.
Have you seen cases where OSHA has levied fines related to the B109?
Go ahead.
The question was, have we seen cases where OSHA has levied fines related to the B109? And the answer to that is yes, we have. We have seen several instances where facilities aren't complying with the B109, or they're not performing it, they're not following up with their recommendations, and OSHA has levied fines as a result of that. Anything to add?
No.
Any regulators, if you have comments on that, feel free to chime in.
Next question. When a manufacturer recommendation for frequency of inspections conflicts with IIAR, then what do you do?
So we discussed this a little bit earlier. So I believe the question is when a manufacturer has a particular recommended frequency,
yeah.
A recommended frequency, and it conflicts with what is required by the B109, what do you do? In cases like that, I would go with whatever is more stringent as far as the regulations, either the regulations or the recommended practice. Yeah. And that's outlined in the B109 documentation.
Is there a requirement to have an outside contractor conduct the B109?
Why don't you take this one?
Sure. So the question was, is there a requirement for an outside contractor to conduct the 5-year inspection for the B109? And can we jump around in our slideshow a little bit?
Sure.
Well, in the B109, the last paragraph before you get to the actual checklists, I believe the subtitles, frequencies of inspections or something, that's where it mentions that you have to do annual visual inspections, and then it says every 5th year, a more thorough inspection must be completed by a qualified refrigerant engineer, fire safety authority, or other competent person. So that's what's spelled out in the standard, and that's open to interpretation. Most people interpret that to mean an outside contractor has to do it. If you are a very large company and have a ton of facilities, and you have a good corporate subject matter expert, I would probably argue that it's fair for him as long as he's independent. Slide 13. If he's independent of the facilities to be able to perform those audits, and I think we're pulling up the. Okay. So yeah, in answer to the question, Did that answer? Are there any comments on that? Okay.
And that would be the last question. And if anybody else has questions, we can wait.
Okay. Yeah. So that's all the questions that we've received so far. We can wait a few minutes to see if anyone's typing anything in.
Well, they can also send them to you later too.
Yeah, correct. The last page of the slideshow includes both George and my email addresses. You have our phone number on the title slide. So if you guys have further questions or comments to elaborate, feel free to give us a call or email us. And thank you all for joining us this morning. Hopefully this was useful.